Hola, ¿cómo están? Soy Susi Moscatel y estoy muy contenta de traerles hoy una entrevista que gozamos profundamente hacer y más sabiendo que se las llevaremos a ustedes. Hablo de Giles Martin, el productor musical, sí, hijo de George Martin, el quinto Beatle, pero también el muy joven productor que retomó el legado, que retomó todas las grabaciones, hizo mezclas increíbles, por ejemplo, para Love de Cirque du Soleil, trabajó con Paul McCartney muchísimo tiempo, ha trabajado con muchos de los grandes desde entonces. Así que ahora él fue uno de los responsables, el responsable principal de remasterizar y crear toda una historia alrededor de los 50 años del álbum Let It Be. Hablando de si era el divorcio o no de los Beatles. Bueno, mejor que nos los cuente él, porque fue una plática, un deleite total.
So tell me about that. I was reading up that at some point your father didn't want you to be the life you led, or the only choice you had, and you said, "Come on, this is what it has to be."
Well, no. What happened was he told me that he didn't want to do music for a living. And I just went and did it anyway. And what happened is that I had they used to be a magazine, so I think it still there is, Enemy in the UK, which is like a famous music magazine. And I did a band, and I got Single of the Week in the NME, and someone showed him the paper saying, Giles is Single of the Week in the NME. And he was like, oh my God, he realized he'd failed. But yeah, I think that he couldn't have been happier in the end that I chose music as a profession. I think he was just worried that it would turn out badly.
Well, plus you got to do a lot of projects together. I mean, I when I see Love, Cirque du Soleil, the work that you did together, honestly, I've seen it over 10 times, and I'll see it every time I'm there. And each time I find something different. I believe it's one of the most beautiful connections through the years that brings us to the present. What was that? What's that like? And then we'll go straight to the movie, because that's also so exciting.
Yeah, Love was amazing. Love was amazing because it was born out of love, funny enough, and it was born out of the fact that me trying to impress my dad is what that was. Is that you know, my father was in hospital, and I met with Neil Aspinall, who was head of Apple, and I said to him, "Listen, I think I can create a show the Beatles never played by chopping up the tapes." There was a lot of mashups going around at that time. I think Kid Rock had done something with "Sweet Home Alabama." You know, I know it sounds it's a bad example, but that's the truth.
No, but I remember that. Yeah,
yeah, and I went to the studio. He said, "You got 3 months. I'm not going to pay you." And I went to Abbey Road, and I'd never worked really at Abbey Road before. And I started working on the show, and I came up with the opening of the show. I came up with "Tomorrow Never Goes Within You Without You." I came up with "Here Comes the Sun" with tablas and Indian instruments. My dad came out of hospital and he heard it, and he thought I was. He honestly thought I was going too far. He thought I was being too abusive to the Beatles, and then Paul heard it, and Paul loved it. And then they said, you should do it. And what would happen is I would do my collaborator, my dad, he was almost my producer, where he would come in once or twice a week, because he was 80 then, and I would play him where I got to on the show. And he had an important role in the fact that I was trying to perform for him, if that made sense.
So you were talking about a bond with your father. I remember when I was very young, I asked my dad what "Let It Be" meant, because I didn't know if it was like a prayer to, or something like let things happen, or just let it go, right? And it's a question I've always had, and I don't need an answer, a specific answer, but what does that mean to you, specifically now?
Well, I think when you hear "let it be" means accept things for what they are. You know, right. I think that's what it means. I think it's a song of acceptance. You know, don't change things for the sake of it.
Correct. And now that we're going to see the movie with Peter Jackson, and we're going to see all the remixes you're doing, and we're going to see so much of that part of the history, what could you tell us that you've learned about this incredible history that your father, the amazing George Martin, did? And what can you tell us that you've learned that you didn't know before?
Well, I think there's a couple of things with Let It Be. Let It Be is seen as a sort of the divorce album of the Beatles,
Right.
because it came out at such an acrimonious time. It came out when the Beatles were, divorcing, when the Beatles were, in the UK at that time, in newspapers, there'd be, on the front page of the paper, there'd be the notes from the court case when the album came out.
Yeah.
But of course, the album wasn't made then. The album was made, as we see, in my lifetime, the album came out when I was alive, and the album was made when I wasn't even, when I was just being thought of. And I think that I've learned a lot from how the Beatles work together. You see on the film and you hear it in the outtakes that this album for me was definitely Paul and John trying to rekindle their relationship in a way, to try and find that spark that maybe had gone, a bit like a marriage where the excitement had gone, and they wanted to go back on dates again. They were trying to go back to the Cavern Club and go back to Hamburg. And they were trying to, I think they put the pressure on themselves to do this crazy project, to do like a live concert in 2.5 weeks, because Brian Epstein with Rubber Soul had said, you got 2 weeks to write an album and go and record it. And they sort of went back to their roots, but you can't go back. You can't really go back. Yeah. You can't really go back and do date nights, because there's so much water under the bridge. But you do see them collaborating. You do hear them collaborating on the outtakes. You have things like "Give Me Some Truth," and you hear John, talking to Paul. Does he have any ideas? And you also hear in the film, you see George becoming more and more lonely because he has all these songs and he's being left on his own. And I think we look for this sort of cataclysmic event that broke up the Beatles, because them stopping was left such a hole in popular culture. And the fact of the matter is they just got a bit tired of each other. It's like it's the same. My father's passing was people go, must have been terrible. I go, no, he was 90 and he was ready to go. It wasn't some big event. He was definitely ready to pass on. And the Beatles, in a way, it sounds ridiculous, but in a way that's quite similar. The Beatles were ready to go their separate ways when they broke up.
Do you think anybody today could be Paul McCartney again? Or obviously not Paul, but something like that in 50 years?
No, I think the world's changed. I think the fact that we live our lives, caring so much about social media and stuff like that. The Beatles had such a bubble around them. And you'll see this when you watch the film. It's like they go, there's just the four of us. It's up to the four of us. It's the four of us. That's what we're doing. There's not this sort of teams of advisors and social media outlets and whatever. They're not tweeting, going to the studios, hashtag cup of coffee, whatever it is. It's not that. It's not. It's a different world. And also the Beatles fed each other like no other band has done. Sure. All four of the Beatles wouldn't have been the Beatles without each one of them. It's like the perfect storm, if you like. George, there's no way George would have written "All Things Must Pass," "Something," and "Here Comes the Sun" had he not been locked in lockdown with John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And John Lennon wouldn't have written certain songs without Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney wouldn't have written certain songs without John Lennon. I think they'd say that themselves. And Ringo wouldn't have never have been the drummer he was without the other three of them. And they're a band that almost like, fusion power, apparently, is a power that gets so hot that it powers itself. And the Beatles were that. They managed to sustain a life that went way beyond most other bands' lives and had an output which definitely, was bigger than most other bands.
I know you also did, you produced a show for Rent live on Broadway, right?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Well, from the Beatles to Rent, I know that Jonathan Larson always said that there was no way Rent would have existed without all the influence the Beatles. I think everybody would say that, everybody who's making good music, but what was your jump from one thing to another? Why, how do you choose to go to those things that are so meaningful for so many of us? What's the meaning in it for you? How do you get there?
I think you try and do projects that are fun and inspirational. And the best reason to do something is because you want to go and see it or you want to go and experience it. Like, I did this Rocket Man. I did the film Rocket Man. I was heavily involved in Rocket Man because I wanted to go and see it.
Yeah.
I'm doing Devil Wears Prada on Broadway at the moment. And it's really good fun. I think it's going to be great. And I want to go and see it. And like Rent's the same. It's like Rent was just... is just so powerful in its messaging and has inspired so many people. I mean, the girl I'm working with on Devil Wears Prada is the lyricist Shayna Taub. She's like 33 and the biggest Rent fan, and she knows everything about Rent. And I just think I've been so lucky to work and to work with people that are just truly amazing. That's the thing. It's like, God, I sit there and I go, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they're famous or not famous. You just work with people and you just go, they're truly amazing. And that's what that's what makes it gets you inspired. It makes you get better as well.
Y ahí lo tenemos. Sabemos que ya pronto veremos el documental de Peter Jackson, precisamente trabajando con Giles y con el resto de la banda, para que veamos todos esos momentos de intimidad en este álbum en el que todo el mundo pensaba que los Beatles se estaban divorciando. Y bueno, como decía Giles, ellos estaban solamente tratando de regresar al origen en cierta manera. Ya sabemos qué pasó con la historia. La música es el mejor testigo. Soy Susi Moscatel, gracias, y sigan escuchando gran música como esta.